Hello and welcome to BRICS Collaborations and Solutions, a special program of World Insight with Tian Wei, coming to you from Xiamen. This year, 2017, ushers in the second decade of BRICS cooperation. The past decade has seen the BRICS countries advancing mutually beneficial partnerships while trying to fulfill international responsibilities. As far as people in the news are concerned, what changes have happened to BRICS in the last decade? What can we expect in the foreseeable future? Are there more opportunities or challenges that lie ahead? And how did countries outside BRICS see the development of this growing platform?
高新兴市场国家和发展国家的代表性发言权。
A series of serious questions. I'm lucky to be joined here by two panelists. They're going to help us to find the answer. With us from my far left, Keir Simons, who is the overseas senior correspondent and anchor of NBC. Welcome to our program.
Thank you.
Great to see you here.
Good to see you too.
After St. Petersburg.
Yes, Keir is my name in English. We were trying to figure out my name in Chinese.
You have to freaking China more in order to figure that big name out.
Okay,
and
it's a work in progress.
Joining us here in the studio, we have from South Africa. Let's see if I could get your name right. Mzwandile Mbeki.
Mzwandile Mbeche.
Okay, there we go. I'll practice that in our program. Presidential correspondent of SABC with South Africa Broadcasting Corporation. Gentlemen, what a pleasure to have you here.
Great to be here.
Thank you very much.
All right, you're coming from different perspectives. One, South Africa, one member of the BRICS countries, the other as an observer from the United States. So what is your takeaway? Busy days here at the BRICS.
South Africa really takes pride in being a member of BRICS. It has brought a lot of advantage for us as a country. And you must remember we are the youngest and perhaps the smallest member of the team, but we tried to play our part with the opening of the Africa Regional Center in Johannesburg a few weeks ago. So we really take pride in that.
Yeah.
And then with initiatives like BRICS and the Africa Regional Center, we hope something big is going to happen.
Mzwandile come here with a lot of pride about the recent development of South Africa. But you know what? As far as I know, Keir is not afraid of competition.
Clearly is what President Xi had to say about the idea, and I think there was a little bit of humor here, the idea that you can expand the pie without having to share out the cheese, which I think was a way of saying that no one has to lose, everybody can win with globalization. So is that really true is an interesting question. I think there's a fascinating question now for BRICS in terms of whether it's still relevant, particularly, for example, just in the context of China's One Belt, One Road policy. Is that surpassing the BRICS collaboration, if you want to call it that? What are those two ideas in competition? And China as clearly the rising power in the world, an extreme dominant and important economy in the world now.
Yes, indeed, a lot of things going on all at the same time during the summit time. But one of the things you mentioned, which is interesting, the quote, everybody is using it, right, these days, the pie and the cheese. I would assume it's a cheese-crusted pie or something like that.
Yes, or cheese in the pie, or who knows where the cheese is in the pie.
But, seriously, what kind of pie do we want to make for the future? And who could join into making this pie? Because we also got the idea of BRICS Plus. Keir.
Thank you for asking me first. In some ways, I feel like a South African has more to say about the question. In some ways, has more invested in the answer.
But we're all observers because we're journalists. We're not the government officers. So please, your observation.
So, I mean, I think that the question he was asking and the answer he was trying to provide is, it's when the world economy is expanding quickly, as we've seen over many, many years, there's an English saying which is, a rising tide lifts all boats. It's very easy to share more wealth around, to be generous with each other, and the tensions that are always there between countries and economies, when with the situation we now face, where the global economy is not rising as quickly as it was, possibly even in some parts of the world stagnating. And you're seeing, and I'll just finish here, you're seeing that question have real implications all the way from developing countries like countries in Africa to the white working class in America, and their response electorally and their response in terms of the way they see politics. So it is a really important question. I'm not sure, honestly, that President Xi's answer that it's okay, everything will be fine, I'm not sure that's simply as simple a solution as he suggests.
Muzwangale, you see that the question coming from our friend, but also we ourselves have something to think about. What kind of path we want to make? How inclusive will it be?
If you listened carefully to President Xi, he was basically saying, in fact, before I go into what the president was saying, let's perhaps go back to the formation of BRICS. Before it was BRICS, it was BRIC. You remember? So when Goldman Sachs just coined
2009, and after the financial crisis, emerging economies become major players.
Exactly. So it was more like an informal coining of the names. But here they got together and then they put some structure together, and a country like myself, South Africa, joined in, and then they started having these structures to really look at how they drive the world economy. Of course, there's a new development bank that is now operational.
2 years already.
Yes. And then based on it, you must remember, Kia, that every time BRICS is meeting, they would always invite other countries. So they normally call it the outreach program. So basically that's the intention, to say, yes, we may have started as a smaller grouping, but we understand that it doesn't have to just end within us. It must go beyond.
The new development bank's a good example, because it's new, okay, but it's nothing like the size of the World Bank, and already China is doing the same thing in Asia with a new bank. So, does the new development bank really hold the promise that it
I think we are talking about very interesting here. That is, do we need more players when we come to the challenges to be handled? Can the players among themselves, is it zero-sum game? They have to compete? Or is it actually they could cooperate with one another to complement one another? I think that's an interesting question, isn't it?
It's a very interesting question. You know what I would say? Ordinarily, we normally say competition is healthy, because someone will offer me something good and something will offer me something better, and someone else will even better both of us.
Sure.
So that's the competition. So if we have new players, IMF, for example, when it comes to issuing out loans, so with their certain conditions. Of course, we don't say there must be no conditions, but there are certain countries, you must be able really to look at different countries. Let me come to my continent, Africa. I think looking at the level of underdevelopment there, we need a lot of infrastructure. Sometimes if, let's say, we go to the IMF and try and seek loans, so they impose the conditions, those conditions that will end up impeding the very kind of progress we're trying to make.
Do we need to have zero-sum games if we are talking about it? That you have one thing and then very exclusive to the other things? Or actually we could have all the players playing their role because there are limited resources, and we should all put in the resources to do something together. And that probably also goes to the question of whether IMF or AIIB or the New Development Bank, or what kind of projects they are working on these days. Kier, your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I think the issue is that there are tensions, and I can understand why President Xi wants to kind of, in some ways, you know what? Maybe you could say in English, he wants to have his pie and eat it, which translates as he wants to have everything. He wants to be able to say everybody can cooperate and it will all be fine and China can have what it wants and everybody can have what it wants. That's not actually necessarily the way the world really works. That's not real politics. I mean, there's not an Indian or a Pakistani here to answer this question, but just to allude to that issue, the Indians...
So you're saying the idealized world does not exist.
The real
so let's
world,
be realistic here. So what is the realistic world like, and how is that going to work with the mechanism? Let's finish first before we go.
But you make the point. Well, you make the point precisely right. It's like that is what I am. It's like, yeah, okay, great, the pie and the cheese, terrific. But actually, that's not how the world really works. Different countries and economies have competing interests, and people don't invest, including China. They don't invest in continents like Africa without wanting something back, and that's the real problem.
Is competition the theme, or actually there are different kinds of themes going on at the same parallel?
It's very important to have the competition. I am for the competition, because once you have competition, at least you are able to have choices. You are able to choose what is it that you want. But there's this notion that perhaps China, maybe not wrongly, China wants to also fulfill its own interest.
Yes.
But who doesn't want to fulfill their own interest?
Right. And there's another point I think which is worth...
I think besides that, there's another point in your answer which I would like to lead out a little bit. That is, can one have it all? Is it possible for one to have it all?
Well,
I guess that explains a lot of things that we are discussing here. Is it realistic to expect that one could have it all?
Yeah.
Or actually, it is much more realistic to expect everybody could win a bit so that eventually everybody could have something. And that goes to the spirit, I guess, of the BRICS. Whether one could have it all, or actually these five together, or probably more joining in, could have more.
When it comes to countries, everyone will talk about we want to share, we want to do things together. But let me tell you, everyone is about self-interest, and that's natural. I mean, even as we are seated here, so we're looking for self-interest.
If you're only doing self-interest, can others work with you? Without others working with you, how could you be, to the most extent, be able to achieve? I think that is the question here.
That's the question. But what happens in that instance is that in order to fulfill your own self-interest, you must be seen, though, to be taken into account their concerns and doing something for them. I think that's, as long as step on his toes.
Don't. Please don't.
As long as I don't step on his toes, and then that's fine. I'll respect him. I would want something from him. But
I think my argument is you will step on my toes. At some stage, you almost have to step on my toes. I mean, Chinese economic and foreign policy, although President Xi gives a great speech, the reality of Chinese economic and foreign policy is that they do recognize that there is Chinese self-interest involved in the policies. You're exactly right.
What kinds of inclusiveness a country or a group has to have in order to be prominent?
The country must be able to put its systems and structures in place. The country must be able to have a vision. They know exactly what is it that it wants in order for it to be able to succeed. Because, I mean, you can look at China, for example. I mean, a few years ago, maybe a few decades ago, it was nowhere near a country like America. But because it had certain plans and a vision, so it put those systems in place, those structures in place. It had a vision, and it's the same thing that happened in America when it developed. So it knew that it wanted to be a
same thing with
superpower.
South Africa. Think
same
about
thing with South
the end
Africa.
of the apartheid.
Exactly.
You guys did a terrific job in the world, a great example. But what about that in this year's BRICS? Can what the Chinese President Xi talked about, which other leaders also echoed about, the so-called golden 10 years ahead happen? What does it take for that to happen? May I have your input very briefly before we go?
Sure. They already have the basis from which to work. They have had 10 years. They can now see where were the weak areas. They can strengthen whatever they want. For example, they're talking about a structure that is already in existence, New Development Bank. So the fact that we are able, within a short space of time of 10 years, to set up a structure that is really helpful to others.
The system that you talked about earlier.
So now is the time, as your president was saying, to then do more economic cooperation. But the question is, how do you do that? That's the question.
Very interesting question. I want to refer back to Kira about this, because the first 10 years, the BRICS started and then developed. You see the economy, the economic situation of the world changed.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to think about the perspective that China comes, since we're talking about what President Xi had to say, and you were talking about, you know, South Africa as a country that emerged from apartheid, and that history, and histories of countries matter a lot. So I think for China, it appears to me from the outside that China is a country that has known what oppression is like, has managed to lift millions of people, of its own people, out of poverty, and has a huge domestic interest in continuing its economic expansion in the name of its people. So you can see there in
economic development, we prefer that word.
Yes, and China, you know, China's policy is very much number one on China's policy is to try to continue that economic expansion, and China can see that globalization and global stability are two of the pieces of the recipe that you need for that pie to be cooked. So all of those things in China's DNA, you can see why President Xi would want to present that picture. I guess the question that we're really asking is it a realistic picture? Is it something that, you know, can really? But I wanted to just finish with the one point. What I do think is interesting.
I'd love to have a show with my colleagues.
We're not fighting, are we? We're just kind of debating.
Go ahead.
But I think what I was getting to earlier, and I think is interesting to talk about, is what influence does it have on American foreign policy and American economic policy? Because if you just want to talk about the World Bank, for example, the World Bank has clearly made many mistakes. It hasn't got everything right. It's extremely powerful, and it's very, very dominant. Now, the potential for there to be competitors with the World Bank that actually can have a really positive effect. I mean, that can change World Bank policy. It can change policy in Washington if there is seen to be competition. And in a sense, I think that's where competition as opposed to cooperation can be very successful, particularly for a country like South Africa and other African countries.
Absolutely.
If I could jump
agree
in
100%
before,
with him
since
on
we're
that
talking about the
We agree
IMF
with
and
each
the
other.
World
We just
Oh,
should pause for a
that's
moment.
a nightmare for a host. When we talk about the World Bank and the IMF, I did have some interviews with both the New Development Bank and also some of the other executives of the other two entities that we talk about. And they are having cooperative projects going on right now as we speak. And the amount of it is going ever larger. This is just some information I want to add here. But let's go to you. I'm sure you have a lot of things to throw back at Kier.
As much as some people would say China is going there with self-interest, that is very true. But they are there with their own self-interest as well. So all we need to do, those who come with their self-interest, we must allow them to come. But we must make sure that our self-interests as well are taken care of. So basically what needs to happen is that the conditions must also be able to favor us.
Here raised a very interesting and important question. Where is the United States? And how are we looking at the BRICS as a whole, vis-a-vis or in the context of the globe, of the international stage?
You know, there is a group in America who whose parents and grandparents became used to getting a job for the rest of their life in a factory or a manual labor job often, but sometimes a middle-class job, paying well, and they maybe had a high school education and as far as their education went, and those...
So the competitiveness
Yes.
that we are talking about
well,
here.
those people have been losing out over a sustained period, particularly since the economic crisis, and that has led to a hardening of views in the United States, a polarization. It's talked
That's
about.
Right.
Many people argue it's led to the election of President Trump, and whether you think President Trump has many things right or wrong, it's clear that his election is a reflection of that deep anxiety by a large section of American society.
Do you think when the BRICS leaders are talking to one another, are they thinking about what they can do together more, or are they thinking about, there's something like the United States out there?
You know, maybe a bit of both, and I'll tell you why. The United States will always be a factor for a very long time to come. I agree with you. It's a very dominant factor, so we can't run away from that. So, but there's also an opportunity in the actions of the United States currently. The United States, it's supposed, given its size, its military power, its economic power, it's supposed to be really the leader in all aspects. But if the United States appears to take a backseat, nature doesn't allow for a vacuum. So countries like BRICS countries, with China, I said earlier, China is number 2 in terms of the world economy, and it's rising. So if they see the gap, and here is a platform called BRICS, China is the main player in the BRICS, they will definitely grab that opportunity. That is what is happening right now.
When you skillfully argue about where China is and where the United States is, it seems that message is, come on, China, United States, Africa, rising continent, please come and work with us. You guys need to compete in order to work with us. Is that the message you want to express here?
You know, as Africa...
See, everybody has something.
That is not only the message he wants to express, that is the right message for Africa to
This is exactly what we are talking about, that everybody needs to have their interests fulfilled in any kinds of relationship that they want to be in.
Absolutely. You know, before we used to receive a lot of aid from America, from China, from Europe. But as the African continent, we are more interested in trade these days. Because once we are able to trade, we'll be able to build the infrastructure. And then once you are able to set up those institutions, and then you enable things like trade to really pick up.
Are the BRICS only about economic and trade ties anymore? Should there be other issues, for example, geopolitical issues, political issues, and geosocial issues included in the discussion? Will something like the DPRK crisis overshadow the important different layers of discussions at this platform or other platforms?
Maybe not at this platform, but if you look at the proximity of China and DPRK and the importance of Russia, I'm talking about a country which is strong militarily as well. I mean, obviously China is still strong, and then America on the other side. So you can't ignore the fact that some sort of engagement is needed. So you can't just say, oh, no, I'm just about economy. You start saying, no, don't do that, because I'll respond. So I think a country like China, which is really has some sort of influence on the DPRK, maybe must take a lead.
The interesting thing watching China, and it's not just about the DPRK, it's a broader point. China has, for a long period, attempted to take a policy which was effectively that we'd like to see stability in the world, because really what we want is to just continue our economic development. That's all we really care about, you know, apart from perhaps our most closest regional partners. But China is having to face the responsibilities of being a powerful country, and it's having to figure out how much it needs to intervene in the world. And you're seeing that all around the world. The questions for China are just becoming bigger and bigger in terms of, okay, what are you going to do, and what is your foreign policy going to be? And I think that's unavoidable for China.
One of the things very crucial for, I guess, our audience to understand as well, I remember there's one quote coming from Africa that is, if you walk alone, you walk really fast. If you walk with others, you really walk far. And that sentence has been quoted by many occasions, I guess, involving China and Africa. And I guess that also explains a very leading change that we're having in this world today. Are we going to have just one major power or two major powers? Or actually, we're going to have different layers of partnerships that would help us, and entities as well, to help us tackle with problems at different areas and eventually help us to solve the problem. I guess that's a grand picture that we're talking about here. We might not be able to sit here and discuss them all. Absolutely. But I have been having tremendous inspirations from both of you, my dear colleagues coming from South Africa and the United States. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
And
Thank
share
you
your very insightful views in a very frank way with our audience on CGTN. Thank you, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And you're watching BRICS Collaborations and Solutions, a special program of World Insight with Tian Wei, and we'll be back after this.
提高新兴市场国家和发展国家的代表性发言权。
You're watching BRICS Collaboration and Solutions, a special program of World Insight with Tian Wei, coming to you from Xiamen. The past decade has not only seen solid progress in BRICS cooperation mechanism, it has also witnessed the carrying out of all-round reforms. As the BRICS countries are about to enter a second decade, the mechanism will create new opportunities for all members and to welcome a golden decade. But how to achieve that? We have a person in the know. Let's meet.
Lindiwe Daphne Zulu, South Africa's Minister of Small Business Development, has a legendary life. After finishing school, she joined the African National Congress and then went into exile in Mozambique. In 1992, Zulu returned to South Africa as the head of communications in the ANC's Women's League. She was a faithful follower of the ANC and has always been a fearless fighter during the days of apartheid. After the social changes in South Africa, she became a rising star in politics. She used to serve as a special consultant in international policy for President Jacob Zuma. During her tenure, she and her colleagues worked together to promote South Africa's accession to BRICS. She then served as the first minister for small and medium enterprises in South Africa. Her broad network earned her the support of all the cabinet ministers, who offered resources to support her causes. Zulu has confidence that BRICS will become a world power in the next 10 years and will maintain world peace and stability.
And joining me here in Xiamen, we have Ms. Lindiwe Zulu, who is the South African Minister of Small Business Development. Minister Zulu, welcome to our program.
Thank you very much. I always see you on the program, and today I see you live.
Thank
very
you.
Happy.
Very flattered, and
Yeah.
great to have our friends from South Africa as well.
Yes, absolutely. We are very happy to be at this 9th BRICS Summit, and also excited about the first year. The BRICS Summit will be in South Africa, so there's a lot that we are looking at and ensuring that there's lessons learned so that when it comes to South Africa, we're very ready for the heads of state to come to South Africa.
You are the very first Minister of Small Enterprise Development, and you have to coordinate everyone,
Yes.
to contribute to this. How does that work?
I think what is very important is the recognition by South Africa ultimately of the importance of small and medium enterprises, and in particular in our case as South Africa addressing the triple challenges that we face: poverty, unemployment and inequality, and also bringing on board thousands of other people, black people in particular, who were never in the mainstream economy of South Africa. I think that's the first and most important thing. The second issue is that understanding that small and medium enterprises are the job creators, and South Africa needs jobs. We've been shedding jobs a lot, especially because the economy has not been doing very well, and therefore we understand that if we were to also focus on building part of building of our economy will also rely on how much we assist of small and medium enterprises.
I see. But how long a time frame are we talking about? If we're talking about these kind of fundamental changes, it takes a lot of time. Will small and medium-sized companies, establishment of them, really likely to change the whole picture?
Yes, absolutely. One of the most important elements of our economic development is the fact that we are saying we need to change the structure of the economy of South Africa. In other words, it means we must change the management of the economy so that it also benefits those that were not benefited in the past. And we think that encouraging small and medium enterprise will be but one of the elements, but a very important element, especially in today's time. More so when we look at other developed countries in particular, Most of them speak to big figures that indicate that if you support small and medium enterprises, you create jobs, you create more innovation. And so as a country, we're looking at ensuring that we support small and medium enterprises. All the ministers in government are very supportive. And as a Minister of Small Business Development, I am asking, what is it they have in their departments to support, including the budget? If they have 9 billion or 30 billion, I'm asking the question, how much of that will go to small businesses?
Your colleagues will approach you, or they would run away when they see you?
Oh, no, they don't run away. They don't run away because it is important also to them.
The other thing about small enterprises is on what basis can the BRICS countries work together? Remember at the very beginning of the BRICS Business Forum, Chinese President Xi Jinping, in his opening remark, was already talking about small and medium-sized enterprises. Later, in the following days and sessions, different kinds of state leaders coming from different countries also emphasize on that. But the question is how?
The first and most important thing is the acceptance by all BRICS partners of growing our economies.
And that is already
we
done.
Start, yes, we start there. And then growing the economies for who? That's the issue. If you are going to be growing the economies for the benefit of your citizens, it means you cannot ignore small and medium enterprises, because as I said earlier on, they will be the creators of the jobs. And I'm happy that within BRICS itself, already there is, under the Ministers of Trade, there is an agreement of including the discussions about small and medium enterprises, access to markets, because there's access to all 5 countries. There's markets, we should be markets of each other.
Right.
And therefore it's important for us that in all the decisions that we make, whether it's about the BRICS Bank and how the bank can be able to be supportive, whether it's about economic trade and how that can happen, and the fact that we have the Business Forum, we also fall under the Business Forum, and therefore the Business Forum has to be conscious of your small and medium enterprises. Growing the economies of all countries is not always about big companies. It's also about small and medium enterprises, and also the opportunities for smaller companies to grow into bigger companies. It can happen through BRICS.
It is the efficiency that we're talking about. It is the development for all that we're talking about here.
In fact, we are going to be bringing a delegation of 50 small and medium enterprises to China in October, under CISMEF, which is part of is a Chinese arranged, and I am going to be leading that South African delegation of small and medium enterprises.
Almost 10 years. How do you see BRICS evolve over the years and the current challenges compared to then the grand picture?
It was a plan, not so big a plan, but 10 years down the line, that plan, we can see it. That plan has taken shape. We are now going to the next decade of BRICS, and the clear about the priority areas is peace, security and stability for all the countries, is creating friendship between those countries, is ensuring that there's a win-win situation for all the countries. But more than that, BRICS is beginning to be realized as a force in the global environment to contributing towards building a better world, because I think what the world really needs right now is really a better world where we deal with terrorism, we deal with climate change, we deal with all the challenges that the continent, the whole world faces today. This is a giant which started rising slowly, and now people can see the giant is standing.
But people still ask about the BRICS relevancy. People ask about the BRICS. Will they be still together for the future, or whether there's competition, cooperation? Briefly, what is your view?
It's cooperation, coordination, and having the same interest and speaking for our people. Because if BRICS was just individual heads of state, it would be a different story altogether. That's the reason why under BRICS we're also looking at people-to-people relations at cultural level, at education level, science and technology, the revolution.
Becoming much more comprehensive than it used to be.
Absolutely. And it is beginning to occupy a bigger scale in the world, because everyone is looking at it. And you know that there's a BRICS Bank also.
That's right.
And in South Africa we recently launched the regional bank
office,
which therefore means where BRICS started 10 years ago as just as a small idea and an opportunity, that opportunity can be seen by the entire world that it's going to happen.
But it is no secret that all these countries in the BRICS are not without challenges,
No,
as all of
absolutely.
you have recognized. So
Absolutely.
what about for South Africa? We know the National African Congress is about to have an election at the end of this year. We also know there are certain kinds of discussions about where South Africa to go from here. What do you say about these political situations back at home? How much will they impact on the economic development and the ideas of even developing and prospering small and medium-sized enterprises?
Let me start by saying that democracy in South Africa is only 23 years old. So even the African National Congress as a governing party is only 23 years old. And therefore the dynamics of the new and the old will always be there. I think what is very consistent.
What is the new?
The new is the new political environment where you have opposition now, which we didn't have in the past, where you've really got people who now have choices, and therefore we have to all show what we can deliver and make sure that people continue to vote for the African National Congress. But also the ANC is an institution that has got its own institutional processes. The constitution of the African National, every 5 years, there has to be an election of new leadership. We just came out of the policy conference of the ANC where we were looking at the current policies and saying what of the current policies needs to be changed. And then the December conference will then will adopt those policy conferences that we develop. So it's work in progress for South Africa to in fact, the fact that we can sit as a BRICS member for ourselves only 23 years after our democracy celebrate as a country.
Minister Zulu, I understand as a very young girl, you participated already in the movement of the ANC.
Yes.
And of course, things have changed, the priorities changed. But what do you think about the involvement of this party as well, about its capabilities to be built in order to compete for the future?
Yes, absolutely. The party also adopted its own organizational renewal, which is a document that is looking at what the party needed to do during the liberation struggle and what the party needs to do under democracy where there's freedom for all, and governing, being the one that is in government, the one that really plans for the changing of the lives of our people through the programs that we would have, whether it's in economic development, whether it's social development, whether it's health, education, and all those areas. This is a party that is very relevant to today, considering the fact that this is the party that really made sure that South Africa was free and that we do have freedom today. We didn't do that on our own. We worked with all our communities. I joined the African National Congress when I was young, and I've been in it since then. I've never left, and I can see where the organization is going. It's all about changing the lives of ordinary people in South Africa.
Will the competition be fiercely?
Yes, it will be fiercely because, again, that's the new environment that I was talking about. In the past, it never was such an issue. It never was so fearful. But right now, people have the right to stand up and say, I think I am capable of being a president. And therefore, they need to then talk to the branches. The branches have to decide. Ultimately, with all the contestation that is happening, December is only 3 months down the line. Members of the African National Congress, delegates to the conference, will decide on who they want as a president of the African National Congress.
It's so wonderful to have you.
My pleasure.
Minister Zulu, to be on our program to talk about not only small and medium-sized enterprises, but the overall development process of the BRICS as a whole. All the best.
Thank you very much.
Madam Minister.
Thank you.
Such a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you.
That is all the time we have for today. If you try to find us, World Insight CGTN, in your search engine, check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone here in Xiamen and in Beijing with our World Insight team, thanks for watching, and tune in again next time for Insights.